the North Down Museum, and Tom Boal very kindly agreed to dress as Abbot Congo and to give us an idea about what life was like at this proto-university of Bangor. That's Great Bangor. Just so we distinguish between the Bangor of Wales, which wasn't as big as this Bangor. So Tom, I'm very excited to be here. Could you give us an idea about what it was like to be a student in the days of Congo?
Yes, being a student would have been extremely difficult, very hard life. Congo, having been trained with Fanta, who believed in a very austere sort of lifestyle, took that, created what was known as the good rule of Bangor, and he expected the monks to apply the good rule extremely carefully. The punishments were quite severe for breaking the rules, to the point, in fact, even of having to stand in a stream overnight, even in the cold winter, just as a way of punishment. And it said that at least one monk died from hypothermia. However, the day would have started round about 4 o'clock in the morning. The monks would have been called to get up with the bells ringing and whatever had to be done to get them out of their bed. At 6 o'clock would have been the first time they would have headed into the church, the oratory, and there they would have had the scriptures read. They would have sung psalms and hymns and Christian songs. They would have been taught the scripture and preached by a number of the more senior members of staff. Following that first step out, the monks then would have gone to their different jobs that they had to do. A very wide range of jobs, because the monastery was not only a place of education for the church, which was its primary object, but it was also like a university. They taught things like Latin, yes, and Greek, but they also taught mathematics, and geometry, and astronomy. Congo was a man who didn't separate the secular from the sacred. As far as he was concerned, everything was of God. Therefore, everything was important. The way worked very much in his teaching, where the ground had to be cleaned and everything had to be made right for the seed to go in. And he used this in his preaching, that the cleanliness of the mind had to be made first before people could advance in their Christian life. He was very much the evangelist. He had a very straightforward approach to scripture, and of course part of the other jobs that the monks would have had during their day's work would have been those in the scriptorium, because many of them would have been copying the scriptures. The monks were travelling out all over Europe. They had to take copies of the scripture with them, and those would have been made here in the monastery in Bangor. Got to bear in mind that you couldn't go down to the shop and buy paper. Everything was written on vellum, so that the skins had to be prepared. The ink was made from oak gall, the little gallstones as we call them, pulverized down, put into water, a little bit of iron added, and that made the ink. So there's somebody making ink all the time. The colours that they used had to be produced. Everything had to be made right from the very beginning. There would have been metal workers, because again, metal was very, very important. And just up the road from Bangor and at Kinlig, there were copper mines. And the copper was brought to Cornwall, where there was tin, and it was converted then into bronze. And of course, the bronze was extremely important. And the Bangor bell that we have here in the museum, the original Bangor bell, it's a bronze bell. Whether or not it was made in Bangor, we don't know, but we do know that it's a very, very special bell indeed. The monks' day then, every 3 hours, they returned to the oratory. They would have spent quite a lot of time in prayer, in meditation, and sometimes I wonder how they get time actually to do any work. But it was the way it was. The important thing was understanding and learning the scriptures, being able to not only understand themselves, but be able to tell others what the scripture was all about. Congo himself was a man who was a mix of hardness and gentleness. He could be very kind to the monks. He encouraged them, particularly those who were showing great possibility of being missionaries, and he encouraged them to a very great extent. Some of the other jobs that were done, of course, were beekeeping was extremely important because honey had a value, and part of the rules of the monastery was that there was no animal food to be eaten. Now that included milk, cheese, eggs, butter, anything like that was considered a luxury. So rough bread, soup and vegetables was the order of the day. They had but one meal a day, around about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, just before the 6 o'clock prayers, and that would have been a case of going into the oratory, and as soon as they walked through the door of the oratory, there was absolute quietness. There was silence. That was so that the monks could provide themselves with time to give thanks for the food they were getting, again concentrate on the life they'd had during the day, possibly just reflect on everything that was happening around them. So they didn't get an awful lot of time to themselves. They had to spread themselves quite a bit across with their friends. Those who were in agriculture, of course, they had to make the ploughs, they had to look after the animals. Another very important thing, of course, was the sheep, because there were many sheep attached to the monastery, and from that, of course, they got the cloth, the wool. The wool had to be washed and carded, spun and woven and dyed. And the sort of habit that I'm wearing here was the sort of thing that the monks would have made themselves. And the colours were, as this is, earthy colours, because that's where the colour came from. Anything that would have made a colour, from the skins of onions to carrots to whatever, provided the colouring for the cloth. So you can see it was a very busy day, right through until the last time going into the church would have been round about 9 o'clock at night, and after that they would have made their way back to their cell, and 2 or 3 monks, depending on the size of them, would have been in a cell like the one behind me here, and they would just have slept in that, because you can understand during the day with all of the jobs that had to be done, there was no way that they could have run back and forward to their cell. There was no possibility of lighting a fire in there because it was a thatched roof. They were small, and of course it would have gone on fire. Congo himself, I often think, has been sort of overtaken by Columbanus, and yes, Columbanus was an extremely intelligent man, as was Congo. Congo had the advantage of coming from a very wealthy family. His father was a nobleman, Setna, and Congo was born in 517, He didn't die until 601. Now that was quite an age at that time for anyone to live. And bearing in mind that the life of austerity probably didn't do him any good either, he died apparently of stomach trouble, which was put down to the fact that he had had a very narrow diet. Yet he lived quite a long life. Congo's main interests were, of course, the Bible. Scripture alone, and when you think of Reformation theology, Congo was away years ahead of him, about 1100 years ahead of him, or certainly 1,000 years ahead of him. So he had this quite narrow view of Scripture. The writings of the time and the writings of Columbanus indicate a very clear-cut message that had to go out. There was no fudging with it. He didn't believe in beating around the bush, as to say. He was a man who told it as it was. He himself obviously was extremely well educated. The fact that he was able to set up a monastery of the size and the development, bearing in mind there were 3,000 monks here at one time, that was a lot of people to be responsible for. And he took his responsibilities very, very seriously. Each monk was important to him. Each monk had his own job to do. Everybody knew exactly what was expected of them. But they were also given the opportunity to grow not only in their faith, but to grow in their position. When a novice came in and he was given his outfit, his habit, on the end of his rope tie would have been one knot. As he took more vows and got more educated and better educated, more knots would have been added. Now, the reason for this was that so that other monks would know who was senior to them. If they were senior to them, they would have to do as the senior man said. If they were junior to them, they could tell them what to do. So it was there was a hierarchy within the monastery. A very interesting thing about these rope ties is that the development of this came from the temple, the Solomon's temple, when the high priest went into the Holy of Holies. If he had taken ill or died, nobody could have gone in to bring him out. So they tied a rope around his waist. He went in. If anything happened to him, he could be pulled out. Hence the rope tie. And even today, many of the monasteries around the world still use the rope tie. That's just a little bit of background information.
What I'm wondering is, let's just bring it down to Columbanus.
Yeah.
So he comes here after maybe 6 or more years under another abbot, Synod.
Yes.
What's he coming to at the time he comes here?
Yes.
How big do you think we were talking about? What was Bangor then, and what was his part in it?
It would have been extremely well known by the time Columbanus came here. That's why he came.
Yes, Jonas says that, doesn't he?
He was, Columbanus was an academic. He taught himself Greek apparently. He loved languages. He loved study. He just loved everything that was to do with Scripture. There's no real indication that Columbanus ever was terribly practical as far as his work went. His job was very much a teaching situation. Highly educated, a brilliant brain, able to take in a lot of information extremely quickly, and he was a man that was looked up to by the others. He seemed to be, it would appear that he carried a charisma with him. even perhaps the Congo didn't have. People seem to flock around Columbanus. He loved his time of going off on his own. He spent a lot of time in prayer, put a lot of value on prayer, as did all of the monks, but Columbanus particularly took many, many hours. Sometimes he would have disappeared for 8-10 hours at a time to meditate and to pray. And of course that was his strength. And I sometimes wonder perhaps that we should be, in our churches, perhaps taking a little bit more time to stand back and to converse with God as Columbanus did.
And he wanted to leave when he felt
Yes.
this call to take the white martyrdom overseas.
Yeah.
How was that greeted by the abbot?
It was not well greeted. Columbanus being the sort of the right-hand man, for a person to lose the right hand, it wouldn't matter too much to me, I'm left-handed, but for a person to lose a right hand would have been a major problem. Not only that, but Congo also knew if Columbanus went, Gaul would go with him. Gaul was very close to Columbanus, and some of the another 10 of his very senior people. However, I think at the end, Columbanus sort of harped on, and being the man he was determined he was going to Europe. However, I think we have to give Columbanus the fact that he respected Congo to the point that he was prepared to do whatever Congo decided. And that says a lot for the man, because he could have up and gone. He could have gone. But he had the blessing of Congo, and that was important to him. Columbanus, I think, along the way, it got to the point where he had been in the job long enough in Bangor. He had achieved what he could achieve in Bangor. Not unlike any of us. I mean, you get to the point where any job, you want to move on, you want to look at other fields. But this was in Columbanus's mind from early on. And of course, Congo, realizing that he himself at one stage wanted to go to Europe, he understood what was behind the Columbanus thinking. So at the end, he agreed, let the man go, and he'll go with my blessing. And that's what happened at the end. When Columbanus came to Bangor, he would have seen a monastery that had been well established, under the control of Congo, a very highly educated, knowledgeable man. He would have seen a very broad spectrum of work going on, with particularly the emphasis on the teaching of the scriptures and the theological training of the monks. That was a primary object. He would also have seen a very practical side to life, because Congo himself was a man who didn't see any difference between secular and sacred. So everything that happened in life was important, and he would have seen almost like a university, a lot of diversity in what they were teaching, from languages like Latin and Greek to the sciences, mathematics and geometry, astronomy and the like. He would have seen a group of people who were very single-minded in what they wanted to achieve, and that was led, of course, by Congo himself.
So can we actually go in and have a look inside? Yeah, sure. After you. So are they all hobbits then? Oh, well, you can stand up all right inside.
Oh, yeah, you can stand up, yes.
And the construction Is this hazel?
That's hazel, willow.
Yep.
And when willow's wet, of course, you can
Blend it in.
weave it much easier, and then whenever it dries out, it goes stiff and hard. The roof, of course, is straw.
Yeah.
And it would have been corn or wheat straw, which was quite long.
And you said that you were telling me earlier this thatch had been on 20 years and never leaked.
It's been in around 20-25 years, and never leaked. No. Quite interesting, actually, is that the double thickness wall,
yes,
filled with straw in between.
Well insulated.
So insulated walls are not a thing new.
Do we have any idea what the floor might have been?
The floor would just have been clay.
Yeah.
It would just have been a clay floor. There would have been no frills with it. Again, bearing in mind that these would have been in through the trees. There would have been a fair bit of protection.
Yeah.
Across the door would have been nothing more than a piece of hide or a heavy piece of cloth, like this here.
Yeah, just to stop the wind rushing.
And just to keep the wind out. The big problem at the time, of course, were wild animals. The wild boar, particularly, could be quite vicious things. And
the cloth wouldn't keep the boar out.
The cloth wouldn't keep the boar out. But they didn't seem to have any great problem with that. The whole thing was fairly well controlled and fairly well kept under under some sort of control. The living would have been nothing more than what we would call, or we used to call a palliasse, which is nothing more than a bag filled with bits of cloth or wool or even straw, possibly.
I've been on a straw mattress, it's very comfortable.
Yeah, and
good insulation.
Really, we're only in from about 10 o'clock at night to 4 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
They didn't have a lot of time to sleep, and no doubt when they came in, they would have slept very soundly.
Yeah, that's right.
Whatever. So it was an interesting lifestyle, to say the least. A hard lifestyle, but still, I would say that they enjoyed.
Yeah, and by the standards of the day, of course, they were tough anyway.
And the fact that the rules were hard, they abided by the rules, and therefore they would have little or no problem. No doubt, when they were working together in the fields or wherever, there would have been quite a lot of chat and normal talk. They were still human beings. There was nothing inhuman about them. So it would have been quite an interesting lifestyle.
And in order to choose this is not to negate what they gave up. They knew what they were giving up, but they had a greater good in mind. Well,
of course, once they joined the monastery, everything they had became the property of the monastery. And the monastery would have become, I suppose, quite wealthy in its own right, because people would have given a lot of stuff to it. And then, of course, in Bangor, when the Vikings came in around the 800s, there were so many monks were killed, and of course all the precious stuff was taken away, and their books were burned and so on. It was quite interesting, actually, that the bell that we have here, the Bangor bell, and it was found late on in the 18th century under a tree. And they were taking the tree down, and they came across the bell.
Someone had
so
buried it.
They reckoned it had been buried at the time of the Viking raids as a way of keeping it, and then probably people forgot where it had been buried and
terrible tragedy.
Didn't get back. It was a tragedy. I often wondered what if the Vikings hadn't come into Ireland at the time. Yes, the Vikings did bring certain other civilized ideas with them. Their shipping, for example, is a prime example. And a very interesting thing about that is that when you look at the design of the Viking ships and the design of the Phoenician ships at the time of the exile of Israel, and of course the shipping, as I say, is so alike. You can see the influence of the same type of transport.
Great. Yes. Great. Well, that's great. So I think we'll wrap that. So we get that light. So join us next time on Saving Europe as we see these Irish emigres establish their first 3 monastic startups near the Vosges Mountains and also begin to lock horns with a Dark Age dynasty that frankly makes the Sopranos or Game of Thrones clans appear anemic. All this and more next time on Saving Europe. Thanks for watching. And do let me know what you liked, what you didn't like, what you'd like to see more of. Just drop them in the comments section. Also, if you find this content helpful, please help me by subscribing to the channel. Remember also that this journey was part of the research for a book which uses the lives of Columbanus and Schumann as an analytical lens to view the course of Western civilization. Do follow the links below to find out more. Thanks for watching.